everybody, hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in segment number 2 by one of our good friends, Rob Donaldson, who does such amazing work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. We're going to be chatting with him about how he takes a look at these conference tournaments, if he does something a little bit different with regards to conference tournament action versus his handicaps during the regular season, some of the games and the conference tournaments that he has his eyes on for the next few days, and so much more. He's always such a wealth of information, so looking forward to that in segment number 2. In the final segment, gonna get you guys picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Tuesday, as we hit some bank shots. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you know one of two ways we fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter, so per usual, please send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, we had ourselves a fun day of college basketball on Monday. Let's take a look back at it, try to find some trends, and try to get to know these teams a little bit better.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
Gonzaga gets the win, but no cover against Oregon State, 65-56 a final. That brings to an end the Wayne Tinkle era out there at Oregon State. And for Gonzaga, yet another under out of this team, as for Gonzaga, the defense has been rock solid. The offense has not quite been what we are used to seeing with Gonzaga, as they're now up to 10 overs and 22 unders thus far this season. Way that they were able to get the job done, Graham Ike, 24 points, 11 rebounds, as Gonzaga was up 14 at the half. They built a pretty comfortable lead. Things got a little bit hairier late. Oregon State just 19-56 from the floor, 6-25 from 3. Gonzaga actually wins the turnover battle by a count of 12-10, but they went just 3-14 from three-point range. Have to do this before I know the exact final in St. Mary's versus Santa Clara. I have to have this up by midnight Pacific, 3 o'clock a.m. Eastern, but I can tell you right now that we've got ourselves a wild one for the Coastal Conference, as Monmouth, they get the job done against Campbell by a count of 74-64. Jason Rivera-Torres, 17 points, 7 boards for a Monmouth team that they've been another team that's been pretty rock solid both against the spread and being able to cash you some unders. Now 17 unders of 15 overs for Monmouth thus far this season, as for Monmouth, just 3 of 18 from three-point range. Same goes for Campbell, and Campbell, they lost the turnover battle 23-7. You are not going to win too many games when you lose the turnover battle 23-7, and that is exactly what they did. For Detroit, they survive. They advance against Robert Morris, 70-60 the final. And don't look now, but Detroit has really been a cash cow and a money maker for you here in the second half of the season. Had a rough go of it from three-point range to begin the season. Actually led the Rising Lake with their three-point shooting percentage in conference play. Now 19-9-1 against the spread, if math serves me correct. And for Detroit, just 5 of 15 from three-point range in this game, but they did the little thing. 17-22 at the free throw line. They win the turnover battle. 15-8. They win the rebound battle, 34-32. As for Robert Morris, they did have in this game Deshaun Good be very good, 14 points, 10 rebounds, but needed a little bit more at the free throw lines. They went 9 of 16 at the charity stripe. And for Orlando Lovejoy, well, they were loving the fact that he gave the team 21 points. So Detroit, they survive and advance. UT Rio Grande Valley has been an interesting team as well. 86-68. They completely mollywhopped Nichols. And for Grande Valley, they've been one of the best teams on the road this far this season. Now 17-13 against the spread, as Phil Brankovic was able to supply the team with 21 points. And for Grande Valley, 12 of 24 from three-point range. They legitimately shoot over 40% from three-point range away from home. They won the turnover battle as well, 14-13. So for Grand Valley, getting every single one of their starters in double figures, that was more than enough to be able to get the job done. Mississippi Valley State finishes up yet another unprofitable season. They went 16-17 against the spread, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been, but for Grambling, they just absolutely lay waste to them. This by a count of 77-52. Mississippi Valley State actually at one point had a 13-5 lead, and then they got outscored, if math serves me correct, 72-39 the rest of the game. As for Grambling, 13 out of 24 from three-point range. Jamal Mutely was able to lead the way with 22 points. For Grambling, they win the turnover battle 18-12. They win the rebound battle 36-35. They won in every facet of this game, so good for Grambling. They do find a way to be able to get the job done there. And then also out there in the SWAC tournament, Alcorn State, 77-65. They take down Alabama State. Alabama State, a pretty big disappointment towards back half of the season. They finish up the season 13-18 against the spread. And Alcorn State, 17-13-1 against the spread. They've been able to cash you a few tickets thus far this season, so That was a fun one. Hofstra, they do find a way to persevere and get the job done against Towson. This by a count of 68-65. This was a closing spread in a lot of places of 4.5. So for Towson, they were able to get the cover in a lot of places, as Towson was one of those teams that was all over the place against the spread, 13-17-1. And for Hofstra, they've been, over the last few years, just a really profitable team, 20-10 against the spread entering into this one. And for Towson, they lose this game pretty much on a bank three with about 0.3 of a second remaining. Hofstra overall goes 11 out of 30 from three-point range. Preston Eadman, he led the way with 22 points. Cruz Davis cruised his way to 18 points. And for Towson, they lose the rebound battle 39-36. They did win the turnover battle 10-6, but they go just 5 of 16 from three-point range, and on their two-point shots, 18 out of 46. So they just need to execute a little bit better, unable to do so. A team that was able to execute really well, though, Wright State. They were the right side against Northern Kentucky, 103-90. The finals, they go. Wright State does 9-21 from three-point range, 9-23 for Northern Kentucky, but for Wright State, they win the turnover battle 15-10. So they're on to the next round. Thanks to 25 points off the bench out of Michael Cooper. He's been their leading scorer recently, has been coming off the bench for them. We did have a ticket punch to March with Furman being able to take down East Tennessee 76-61. The final in this one as ECSU. They were the 1 seed in this tournament. They go just 3 of 16 from three-point range. Furman, by the way, top 5 team in the country with regards to a 2-point shooting percentage away from home. They went 10 of 26 from three-point range. Cooper Bowser, well, he was a final boss in this one. You say Mario Term, 21 points, 11 rebounds. So they find a way to get the job done. Troy also onto the NCAA tournament, 77-61. They take down Georgia Southern, who was going for their 6th win in 6 days. Just ran out of gas. Georgia Southern did go 15 of 15 at the free throw line. They won the turnover battle 16-12, but just like base it on glass. 35-18. They lose that rebound battle. Thomas Dowd by himself had 23 points, 13 rebounds. So for Troy, they're able to get the job done there, and they're back to the NCAA tournament for a second straight season. Texas A&M Corpus Christi, they take it to New Orleans, 74-61 the final. And how about this? 28 points, 8 rebounds out of Daniel McElhaney Jackson, a guy that had been averaging 4.8 points per game prior to this game. Has been coming on strong for them, but that was a very nice performance. You never know in March who's going to be able to step up, and he was able to do so for that crew. And another team that was able to step up and be able to get the job done was Eastern Washington. They do get an 84-79 win over Weber State. For Weber State, they got up big in this game, and then they allowed a 19-1 run in the back half of the first half. That just completely crushed them. As for Weber State, they were able to go 20 of 24 at the free throw line, but they were unable to overcome the fact that they went just 5 of 19 from three-point range. Eastern Washington was 9 of 22 on this night. They also had Alton Hamilton on their side, who for Eastern Washington, 25 points, 5 rebounds. Eastern Washington did lose the turnover battle 12-9, and for Weber State, you had Tejan Sine Jr. be able to step up, give the team 27 points, but just a little bit too little from the outside. That ended up costing them. And if you're taking a look at trend-wise, what we're getting in college basketball right now, overall for the season, it's been an unders and underdog season. The under rate is 50.6%, 2,769 unders, 2,703 overs, with the underdog sitting at 51.4%, 2,810 and 2,661 against the spread. Meanwhile, if you take a look at the last 7 days in college basketball, the over rate has actually been 52.1%, 158 overs to 145 unders, with the underdog sitting at 51%, 156 and 147 against the spread. So that's where we're seeing college basketball right now, and that's where we're all getting trend-wise. Coming up next, how about if we do chat it up with our good friend Rob Donaldson of the Rob's Best Bets Show and Underdog Fantasy right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Decent Family Podcast. Inside Edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at vsin.com/newsletter. That's vsin.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is vsin.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Cuts Soups with myself, Greg Eaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. Always great to be joined by this man, as we've got Rob Donaldson aboard. He does such great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. Looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball, he does some great work over at Underdog Fantasy. He, much like myself, does a great job on multiple sports, as I know that once college basketball is done, he's going to be absolutely dominating on the baseball front as well. And you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at RobDFB altogether. And Rob, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And my goodness, man, I know we just talked about a week ago, but in that week, when you're talking about college basketball this time of year, seasons have come and gone and tickets have been punched for the tournament. We've seen buzzer beaters. We've seen craziness. We've seen a lot of discourse just surrounding the sport in general from a concept standpoint. And I love it. I can't get enough of it. And we only have more on the way.
Oh, absolutely. We do have plenty on the way. And just how do you take a look at this week in college basketball? Because there's a lot of insanity. The totals are set much lower than normal because the intensity is ratcheted up quite a bit. And I think that's just such an interesting week, one that just feels different than what you get during the regular season.
Yeah, and especially, when we're starting to introduce these high major tournaments, it's no longer like the one bid league dynamic, right? When you're talking about, the Big Ten, the ACC, the Big 12, these conference tournaments starting up, we've seen over the years that these conference tournaments maybe don't end up really mattering in terms of kind of your seed in the NCAA tournament or even just your eligibility to actually get in the darn thing if you pick up some wins. But don't tell the programs that, right? We've seen every single year certain teams, whether it's NC State in the ACC or Georgetown in the Big East or, insert team here, just make a magical run hoping to save their season. And absolutely that is going to be the case in some of these leagues. There's going to be bid stealers. And I think when you are looking through just from a handicap standpoint, that is 100% something that you should be factoring in at all times.
And how much do you factor in these teams that try to make a run, the fatigue factor? Because we're seeing it right now as we're doing this podcast on Monday evening with Georgia Southern playing game number 6 in 6 days against Troy. I always think that that's something that needs to be factored in. And if any of these teams on Tuesday in the power conference leagues do make a run, they are certainly going to be probably feeling game number 4 in 4 days, game number 3 in 3 days, and perhaps beyond.
And that's where I think with every conference tournament, before you place a bet, you have to have a handle on the format, right? Because, Georgia Southern playing, 5 games, 6 games in 6 days is a lot different than, say, like the Big Ten tournament format, where it's not like every single round has a bye, a team that just never has played, because I think that actually leads to a little bit of court rust, just kind of that momentum of, we saw it in the Sun Belt where, a lot of teams that were getting those byes got picked off. And I think a lot of that contributed to, hey, a team is coming in playing consecutive basketball. They're in a groove. Another team has just kind of been sitting on their hands, and the team that was sitting on their hands got smoked. Well, in some of these Big Ten tournaments, ACC, Big East, whatnot down the line, you aren't going to see that bye every single round. And so although a team might be playing 4 games in 4 days, the team across from them might have already played 2 games in 2 days and has a very similar dynamic going on against them as well. And so just be mindful of the format before you jump into a lot of these bets is my biggest point of advice. But to your point, for the teams that are running that gauntlet, no lead is safe, right? We've seen a lot of first half leads go by the wayside in the second half. And I think 100% when you're talking about a team like a Georgia Southern, that is one of the big contributing factors is that second half fatigue. So that is something you need to be handicapping in every single bet that you place.
Yep, I think so as well. certainly the fatigue factor not going to be as prevalent on Tuesday. And are there any teams that are going to be playing on Tuesday outside of like the Metro Atlantic final? Because we've got a few finals, obviously, they have a chance to be able to win their conference tournament. But is there any of these teams that you feel like I not necessarily win the tournament? Because asking a team like a Stanford to win the ACC tournament, BYU to win the Big 12 tournament, that's a big ask. But you feel like could legitimately make that run.
And the nice part about these leagues is there's a little bit more openness in the market where you don't have to necessarily bet a future on them to win the thing. You can actually bet like to make the semifinals and that sort of thing. But I think in particular, the ACC provides the most interesting one. And in particular, you look at the 12-13 game between Virginia Tech and Wake Forest. I think regardless of who comes out of that game, given how Clemson has been all over the place this year, that's a pickable game. I think North Carolina, just given the injury situation to Wilson and just not really having, that next level talent to bury a team like Virginia Tech or Wake Forest, makes them susceptible in that round. I think Duke is on a collision course just to win the whole darn thing, in terms of the ACC this year. And so I wouldn't take 12-13 to make that kind of crazy run and knock off Duke. But I do think that if you want to latch on to that Virginia Tech or Wake Forest team, whatever your preference is in terms of style, you might be able to see a team like Virginia Tech or Wake Forest pick off whoever that other team across from them is in that first game, then Clemson, then North Carolina. And that is a run that I'm going to be investing in myself.
Hey, we saw with NC State a few seasons ago, and that was about as unlikely as it gets. They have that last-second sequence against Virginia where they did a miracle 3 just to go to overtime in that game against Virginia to be able to win the ACC tournament and then go to the Final Four in the NCAA tournament. That redefined survive and advance, to say the least. Don't know if we quite get that, but certainly there is some intrigue there, as Rob Donaldson, who does great work over at Underdog Fantasy, has joined me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And hey, you brought up Wake Forest and Virginia Tech. It's a 2.5-point spread with a total of 151.5. Is this a game that you are going to be getting invested in, or do you just want to see which of these teams wins because you feel like either of these teams might be able to make a run if they do win this game?
I think you nailed it with that latter half point, because do I really want to go gung-ho into this game? I think if it gets to a full possession, say like a flat 3 or a 3.5 line where Wake Forest is catching those points, I'm willing to jump in at that number. But at this kind of 2.5, almost like pseudo pick'em type spread, I am just going to say, hey, let's see how this game develops. And then the next time out against Clemson, take that team. And then also take that team again if they go and play North Carolina and advance that far. I think it's going to be more so, kind of to your point, the next 2 rounds from that spot leading in. It's almost kind of like I'm treating it as if it's the play-in game of the NCAA tournament, where you're latching onto that 11 seed that can potentially make that Sweet 16 run, if you will. I do feel like when you look at Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, a lot of untapped potential, a lot of what-if moments this season, and certainly we've seen both these teams compete with the best in the ACC in a number of different spots this year.
Yep, no question about it. I think that one is going to be very much a fun one. And then how do we take a look at some of these teams in the Big 12 tournament? Because you've got a team in Cincinnati that has actually been able to catch some fire here, but the last time they played against Utah did not cover. That's a 10.5 to an 11.5 point spread. And then BYU got the win against Texas Tech, but they have not been looking so great without Richie Saunders themselves.
Yeah, no, I think the Big 12 tournament, and this is typically a tournament that I love watching. We saw even a weird team like Colorado make like a smallish run last year as well. And I think when you're looking at the kind of the starting day or the first round games rather, that could lead to that potential kind of sneaky run. And in this case, I think this team needs that kind of sneaky run to solidify their standing in terms of just the NCAA tournament itself. But you look at Cincinnati, and yeah, they've got Utah, I think, on a platter in that first game. They got to handle business. But I think when you're looking at how they performed the back half of the year, I'm kind of a believer. And yeah, the line's 10.5, but I am going to be willing to lay it right out the gate. And then the next time out when they're playing UCF in that potential, 8-9 game, that's where, again, if you can just pick up that win and get to 19-14 in Big 12 play with that, that chance, quote unquote chance to beat Arizona in the Big 12 tournament, maybe that does swing some decisions down the stretch on the bubble, because the bubble's been really bad. It's been underperforming. It's opening the door for a team like a Cincinnati to sneak in the back. So I do think that if Cincinnati can come out tomorrow guns a-blazing the way that they should, they can also beat UCF. And so that would be one of those, again, many runs that I'm targeting when it comes to the Big 12 conference tournament.
Yep, the Big 12 Conference Tournament figures to be a good one, and I'm certainly going to have my eyes peeled there. And as we're doing this, we don't know a lot of the finals that we're going to be seeing in terms of these conference tournaments. We do know that we are most likely going to be seeing Gonzaga unless if something horribly wrong happened against Oregon State. But that said, we do have one final set that we do know of. That would be Siena versus Merrimack. And right now, Merrimack is at 2.5 to 3 point favor. 127.5, 128.5 is that total. How do you take a look at this game? Because Merrimack does such a great job with so many little things, but they do get blasted on the glass. And then you do have a Siena team that plays as slow as all heck, and they do a lot of the same things that Merrimack does.
And a lot of different storylines are swirling in this one, right? Because, McNamara and Siena, they have a chance to make the NCAA tournament for the first time since Fran McCaffery was in that building. I mean, you're going back to quite some time, over 15 years from this date. And on the other side, you have Merrimack having their first chance at actually making, the NCAA tournament. And Gallo, we will see, if he is still the head coach at Merrimack next season. I tend to think that you got to capitalize on your stock when it's hot, and it's very, very hot for Joe Gallo over there, and or Gallo right there. And I do think from that standpoint, looking at the 3.5 line, looking at how Merrimack can really kind of dictate the pace of this game, I am willing to lay it. It's not my favorite number to lay, but I do think that Merrimack right now, coming off that scare against Marist, is going to be the most prepared of their entire season. Almost kind of feeling like they're battle tested, even to the highest extent coming off that game. And because of that, I am going to be willing to lay the 3.5 number. I also really like the under in that spot as well.
I think that that's a great look. And with regards to these conference tournaments, we are going to have a lot of great finals that are going to be coming up as well. And is there a tournament or two that maybe is starting up on Wednesday? Maybe they're on hiatus that you do have your eye on, whether they're going to be playing games on Tuesday or it's going to be a tournament that gets restarted on Wednesday, or heck, maybe it's a final that's already set that we're going to be seeing in a few days.
Yeah, no, I think there's obviously, when you're talking about Tuesday and Wednesday, combining all the tournaments that are in action on those days, you're talking about a lot of fun tournaments. And ultimately, I think the one that has always struck my interest the most when you're talking about just these postseason tournaments that are not high major related, you look at the Mountain West, right? And the Mountain West last year gave us Colorado State. It was a magical run. It kind of felt like one of those runs that it was storybook, that they were destined to make a little bit of run in the NCAA tournament. They almost did. They almost made the Sweet 16, and whether it was a travel or not by Derek Queen, I know that's still being debated to this day. But when you're looking at the Mountain West this year, there are some solidified top teams. The constant is Utah State, where they're so great every single year, and heck, even San Diego State, very much the same. But you look at a team like a UNLV, for example, playing Wyoming in that 8-9 game. I think this is the craziest dynamic in all of the Mountain West, because Wyoming under Sundance Wicks has taken a massive leap this year. And it does kind of feel like they can beat anybody in this tournament. I truly believe that, especially on a neutral floor. And when you're looking at UNLV, obviously this game is being hosted in Las Vegas. UNLV has the best offensive scorer in this entire conference tournament. And so if you want to, bank on maybe just the high upside of a guard who can go out there and drop 40 on any given night, take a stab at UNLV. Heck, even take a stab at Wyoming to just win the whole thing. I genuinely think that's in the cards, because if they can get by Utah State, whoever that is, that the next seed line is going to feed in either Nevada or Grand Canyon, most likely. That's a winnable game no matter who you're playing on a neutral. So I'm looking at UNLV. I'm looking at Wyoming starting up on Wednesday as kind of my futures to hitch my wagon to on kind of the lower end or the higher upside end of the odds line there.
No question about it. That is going to be a fun Mountain West tournament. San Diego State, they very much need to be able to win to have hope of being able to make the NCAA tournament, unlike a lot of seasons. So they're one to keep an eye on. Probably don't want to be taking Air Force futures. I'm sorry, that has been absolutely brutal. If you're giving out Air Force futures, Rob, I'm going to need to check you for, I don't know what sort of
stuff. Sadistic.
Yeah, there are some sort of supplements that are going on that might not be supplementing. So there's that aspect of things. But that said, Rob, you did not give out an Air Force future, which we very much appreciate. And you're doing such great work looking at this amazing game that we all know and love of college basketball. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, Greg, it's always great talking ball with you, my man. And this is the best time of year to be doing it. So thank you for having me on. And for those who want to follow my bets on a nightly basis, Twitter/X at RobDFB, and also my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Rob Donaldson. But as always, Greg, I appreciate having me on, man.
Always appreciate having Rob aboard. He does such an amazing job looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. And every single time he joins me on such great insight. So big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VC family of podcasts. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on the game on the betting board for this college basketball Tuesday as we hit some big shots. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VC family podcast. Always great to be joined by Rob Donaldson, who does such great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights, and he did so once again today. So a big thanks to Rob for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Tuesday as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
Do note that, as per usual, any changes that are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at GUNet_81. We're going to be going in Las Vegas rotation order. This is essentially tip time with regards to these conference tournaments. So the earliest tip, that is going to be the Big 12 tournament, and then we go with the ACC, the Big 10 down the list, and the conferences are in the extra games board. Those are the smaller conferences. So that'll go SWAC, Northeast Conference, America East, and then the Southland. So we'll try to keep things as clean and easy as possible. If you don't get all of that, well, I list the order of the games wherever you find podcasts, whether this be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Twitter/X. I list the order that I go in with regards to the game. So that should help. And it starts with 601, 602. Baylor is going to be playing against Arizona State out there in Kansas City, Missouri. Baylor is a 3.5 point favorite. Total between 154.5 to 155.5, and I did set a total here of a 155, and personally, I would rather go with the 155.5 plus the under. I'm starting to see a 156 out there as well, so pretty much anything above a 155, I am in on the under, mainly because Baylor, even though they're not like the slowest team in the world, 135th in terms of total possessions per game, on January 1st, they were a top 70 team in terms of total possessions per game, and they've slowed themselves down. Meanwhile, you've got an Arizona State team that has been fast, 79th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and neither team is great on defense. Arizona State 222nd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Baylor's 251st, but I just don't know if the shooting is going to be traveling for these teams. Now, we'll say, if you look at Arizona State in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, they have been a team that has actually stepped up to the plate when they've been away from home. Overall, 168th in terms of points per possession. Away from home, they actually average 1.6 points more per 100 possessions than they do at home. One of the few teams in all of college basketball that's able to say that in a roadside shoot score venue, they do ascend into the top 75 with regards to points per possession on offense. Meanwhile, for Baylor, they're averaging more around about 17.5 points fewer per 100 possessions when they're away from home rather than at home, but they've got a big edge on the glass. This Baylor team is a top 25 unit in terms of offensive rebound percentage. The one guy for Arizona State that's been able to step up down low has been Masamba Diop. He's able to give you multiple blocks per game. He's been a double-figure scorer that supplies for the team right around about 6 rebounds per contest. Mo Odom is sort of that do-it-all point guard. 17 points, trio of boards, 6 assists, and is a 39% three-point shooter. And then you do have to like Santiago Triot, the fact that he's able to give you about 6 rebounds per game, but Triot and Diop are the lone two guys that give you over 3.5 rebounds per game. And for Baylor, they've dealt with some depth issues because they were hoping James Nanji would be able to give them something, and he just hasn't given them anything. But that said, Tonde Yusufu is a do-it-all guy, 18 points, right around about 6 boards, pair of assists. Not a great three-point shooter, but Cameron Carr, he drives a little bit of everything, 19 points, 5.5 boards, a block and a half, shoots 40% from three-point range. You've had Isaac Williams coming off the bench, and he's been shooting 47% from 3. They've utilized him a little bit more in a starter's role, and Michael Rata has been able to give you a bit of something as well. I know that he's been dealing with a bit of injury, though. And then Dan Skillings, his 9.5 points, 6 boards, I do think allows Baylor to be able to win the battle down low. I do think that this is going to be a game where both teams struggle just a little bit from three-point range, and in a pressure spot, Baylor shoots about 73% at the free throw line. It's an Arizona State group that certainly will put you on the free throw line. They do shoot about 75.5% themselves at the free throw line, but do think that Baylor has enough down low to be able to get the job done. Maybe Baylor the 5-point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to lay the 3.5 and 155.5 or higher, like the under. 603, 604. You've got Utah playing against Cincinnati, and yes, we're on to Cincinnati, who's on to being a 10.5 to an 11.5 point favorite. 138.5 to 139.5 is the total, and with this one. I did set my total at 142.5. I like the over as Utah 326th in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Now, while Cincinnati is overall 17th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, outside the top 100 away from home. Away from home, they are allowing about 19.4 points more per 100 possessions than they do at home, and it's a Utah unit that's shooting 37.5% from three-point range away from home. That is a top 30 mark in the country. You've got a nice go-to scorer in Terrence Brown, who's been supplying the team with about 20 points, 3.8 assists per game. Don McHenry, he's a darn near 40% three-point shooter with about 17 points per game. Not a lot down low. You've got Keno Dawes, 12.5 points, 8.5 rebounds per game. James Okonkwo, 3 points, a block, 5.5 rebounds per game, and those are the lone two guys on the roster that gave you over 3.4 rebounds per game. Meanwhile, for Cincinnati, you do have Baba Miller, who's been able to give you darn near a double-double this year, 13.4 points, 10.1 rebounds per game. Mustafa Team throws in there a block and a half, 12.5 points, 6.7 rebounds per game, so these guys have been rock solid. And Jizzle James has really been able to elevate the offense overall for the season. Cincinnati outside the top 215 in terms of points per possession, but he's a 44% three-point shooter. It's a big reason why Cincinnati shooting over 35% from three-point range in conference play, less than 32.5% outside the conference. Now for Cincinnati, if they need to cover this game at the free throw line, they shoot 68.1%. That is not great at the free throw line. That's outside the top 300 in the country. They're not going to be put under duress. So Cincinnati's about 200th with regards to ball security. Utah's outside the top 325 in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis, but it is a Cincinnati team that's a little bit stronger on the glass than they are around the perimeter. They're a solid team in terms of generating turnovers, right around about 80th in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis, but I do think that Utah does just enough to be able to hold in there, and I do think that with Utah shooting in the way that they do from three, you do get an over in this spot. So semi-total 142.5. I like the over and the points with Utah made them an 8.5-point dog. 6-5, 6-6. Kansas State and BYU do battle, and Kansas State right now an underdog of 10.5 points. So on this game, 165.5 to 166, and made a total of a 164.5. I do like the under. I do think that the neutral core vibe does help you out a little bit to the under. It's a Kansas State team that is currently 15th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. BYU is 70th, and you do have to note that for Kansas State right now, it is Matthew Driscoll who's the interim coach for this team. You may recall he was the coach over at North Florida. North Florida is very notorious for playing up tempo and just hooking up a whole bunch of threes. You do have a guy in PJ Haggerty who's really able to keep you in a game. 23.5 points, 5.3 boards, 4 assists, and he's been able to shoot 34.5% from three, but I still had to set this team as a 12.5-point underdog, mainly because he is the lone guy outside of Taj Manning that gives you over 5 rebounds per game. Manning 5.1 boards and 4.2 points per game. You've had Nate Johnson be able to give you about 2.3 steals per contest, but it's a Kansas State team that they're not doing a great job in terms of protecting the ball. They're outside the top 270 in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. They themselves outside the top 250 in terms of generating turnovers. They're outside the top 200 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, just getting killed on the glass. Outside the top 230 in terms of overall rebound percentage, and recognize that BYU has not been the same team without Richie Saunders, but you still have AJ DeBonsa along with Robert Wright, who between the two of them, they're averaging about 43 points per game. DeBonsa shoots 34% from three, 6.5 boards, 4 assists per game, and then Wright has been Mr. Wright. 4.6 assists, shoots over 41% from three-point. You're going to need to get a little bit more out of guys like a Milo Bosovic, who's only been able to give you about 3 points per contest. You've got Kadeem Mubop, who's been able to give you about 5 boards. Gives you no scoring whatsoever, but I do think that for BYU, they're going to need to, shall we say, button up on defense a little bit, and I think we saw a little bit of that in the second half of that game against Texas Tech. They did a nice job in terms of being able to get the job done there. They have been outside the top 115 this year in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but I do think that they're going to go a little bit bigger. Kebakita is able to give you 7 rebounds per game, and BYU has a very sizable edge on the glass. I think that they're going to utilize that to get the job done and do just enough for this game to hold under. So I told 164.5, so like the under with BYU, I'm going to be willing to lay up to 12 with them. 6-7, 6-8, Colorado and Oklahoma State to battle, and Oklahoma State finds themselves as a 1.5 to a 2.5 point favorite. 163.5 to 164.5 is the total, and I set my total 165.5. So I do like the over in this ordeal, mainly because I do think that you're going to get a very up and down game. Oklahoma State, in terms of total possessions per game, 7th in the country. Colorado's playing at a pretty brisk pace as well. They're 95th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And Colorado's been a respectable offense. They're overall 84th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Oklahoma State, neither here nor there. They're more about 110th in the country in terms of points per possession, but I would argue that they actually have the best scorer in this game, as Anthony Roy has been able to supply the team with about 16 points per game. Now, Parsa Fala, who's been very versatile at about 6'9", shooting over 40% from three, 14.5 points, 6 rebounds. He's out with an injury, so that hurts the team, but you have Jalen Curry along with Victorious Miller in the backcourt. They combine for about 21.5 points per game. Miller's been able to shoot 38% from three-point range, and both two combined for about 2.5 steals per game. It's an Oklahoma State team that is a top 160 team in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis, and to the credit of Colorado, they're a top 85 team in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis, and both of these teams are getting absolutely bombed from three-point range, so that's a big reason why I do like the over in this spot. You take a look at this Oklahoma State team, and they're allowing teams to shoot right in that neighborhood, about 35.5% from three-point, 269th in the country, but that does come down to 33.1% away from home. Colorado 343rd. They allow teams to shoot 37% overall, 39% away from home, and they are a team that is just a little bit of a different team when they're away from Boulder. Now, I will say Barrington Hargress, he has been a good three-point shooter no matter where he's been. Right now, supplying the team with 14 points, 4.5 assists, shoots 49.5% from three. Isaiah Johnson, 17 points. He throws in there about 3 boards per contest. And then Sebastian Reynick, Bengodak, they combine for about 12 rebounds, 23.5 points per game. So, like what these guys bring to the table. And Colorado, if they're in a pressure spot, they shoot 76% the free throw line. That is a top 60 mark in the country, but that's just absolutely awful perimeter defense. They don't put you under duress. They're outside the top 250 in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis, and they're about country average, just a hair outside the top 135 with their 2-point shooting percentage. Do think that Oklahoma State has a little bit more there to be able to get the job done. Made Oklahoma State the 2.5-point favorite. I'm willing to lay up to a deuce with them. I like the over. I set my total at a 165.5, 6-9, 6-10. This is the ACC tournament where Stanford and Pittsburgh do battle. This is going to be from Charlotte, North Carolina, and Stanford is a 4.5 to a 5.5-point favorite. Total on this game 138.5 to 139.5. Set Stanford as a 5.5-point favorite. So 5 or less, I'm going to be willing to lay it with the Cardinal. Stanford has been able to do a pretty solid job in terms of giving themselves second and third chances when they've been away from home. Meanwhile, you've got a Pittsburgh team that on the defensive glass have not been bad. This Pittsburgh team right now 80th in the country in terms of percentage of opponents' missed shots that result in an offensive rebound and games played away from home. That does ascend to the top 70. Meanwhile, for Stanford, this has been a team that's been neither here nor there with their defense just outside the top 100 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but it is a group that has been able to do a pretty solid job in terms of hauling in their second and third chances in games played away from home on the offensive glass. They've been able to haul in there right around about 31.6% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. That is a top 75 mark in the country, and they've got by far the best scorer in this game. Abuka Okore continues to give you 22.5 points per game. It's been a little bit up and down with his three-point shooting. He's overall shooting in that neighborhood about 36% from distance. He's been heating up over the last few games. Benny Geeler, Sable Geeler done 11 points, shoots 41% from three, and then Jeremy Dent-Smith is a 39% three-point shooter. What I do like about Stanford is out of your top 4 scorers, all but one of them shoot at least 83% at the free throw line, so they do the little things well. Top 100 team in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis on offense, top 115 team in terms of generating them on defense, and they're also the much, much better free throw shooting team because this Pittsburgh team is absolutely awful at the free throw line, which makes them almost unbettable in terms of a tight spread situation. For Pittsburgh right now, they shoot 67% of the free throw line. That is a bottom 25 mark in all of college basketball. Now, Cam Corrin, 13 points, 7 boards. He shoots 38% from three. Pittsburgh overall shoots 33.3% from three. It hasn't traveled the world's worst, but they're also getting just line based on the inside. Even though they're actually a pretty solid team with regards to rebounding, this team is outside the top 200 with their own 2-point shooting percentage, outside the top 240 in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. We'll say Stanford has not been the best team in terms of executing on the inside. They themselves are outside the top 230 with their own 2-point shooting percentage. DeMarco Minor comes up major with about 9 points. He actually shoots 88% at the free throw line, 4 boards, 3.5 assists, 2.5 per contest, and shoots about 33% from three. Not just in Stertis, hopefully I said that correct. He's able to give you about 37% three-point shooting, but just been a big giant mismatch for Pittsburgh. They're outside the top 175 in terms of all security, and I do think that for Stanford, they should be able to get the job done as they're just doing the little things better. I set my line at 5.5, willing to lay up to 5 with them. Made this total a 138.5. So right now we're seeing out there 139.5, 139 or higher. I'm going to be in on the under. 6'11, 6'12. Syracuse is going to be playing against SMU. SMU 4.5 to 5.5 point favorite. So on this game, 156.5 to 157.5. I do like the under. I set my total at a 154.5, mainly because Syracuse just doesn't do a great job on offense. They've been a relatively mid-tempo team, 144th in terms of total possessions per game. SMU, no doubt they're looking to gut it, 40th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and it's an SMU team that's given themselves second and third chances. In games played away from home, 32.5% of their missed shots do become an offensive rebound, and that is a top 45 mark in the country. And the Syracuse defense that at the beginning part of the season was very proud and very strong, well, it's hit the skids, and in games played away from them, they're allowing teams to grab 34.5% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. That is outside the top 320 in all of college basketball. Oh, well, this team is outside the top 135 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. The Coach Autry era not working out very well for Syracuse right now. They do have Donnie Freeman, give you 17 points, 7.5 rebounds per game, but the backcourt has just been a mess. Nate King shoots 37% from three with about 12 points per game. J.J. Starlin has just never lived up to his potential. 11 points, 2 assists on 29.5% three-point shooting. You just expected much more out of him. William Kyle's been solid down low. 2.5 blocks, 7 boards, 8.5 points per game, but it's also a Syracuse team that has been giving it up from three. They're outside the top 160 in terms of opponents' three-point shooting percentage. They're outside the top 250 in terms of their defensive rebound percentage. It gets even worse away from them. I will say top 10 team in terms of shot blocking, but for Syracuse, at 64.9% free throw shooting, that is going to be a big, giant issue. And then you've got a SMU bunch that is going to be without one of their main guys, and BJ Turn It Up Edwards. And that's a big reason why I did have to take a shot here on the under, because this SMU team, they've been a very solid offense, top 45 team in terms of points per possession. They shoot as a whole 30.2% per three. That's the top 25 mark in the country. But Edwards, he was actually the quarterback of the defense. He was giving you 6 boards, 5 assists, 2.5 steals, shot about 37% from three. That's a little bit of a blow. That means that you're probably going to be playing a little bit more Jermaine O'Neal Jr. He does shoot 40% from three, but it's on low volume. He only gives you about 5 points per contest. You have to think that they're going to be looking a little bit more to perhaps someone like even a Mitchell Holmes, who hasn't seen a lot of minutes thus far this season. He's a little bit more of a big man, so they might be going down low a bit more because they have been as well outside the top 175 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They've been getting beat in the paint with Samat Yidoglu, really your lone post presence, block and a half, 11 points, 8 rebounds per game, but you still have Kevin Miller booping teams, 19.5 points. He shoots 42% from three. Jerron Pierre gives you 17.5 points, 5 boards. He shoots 38% from three. And with Syracuse, not doing a great job guarding the outside away from home. They're allowing teams to shoot about 36.9% from three-point range, even with the Edwards injury. I do think that SMU gets the job done. So set SMU as a 6.5 point favorite. We'll lay up to 6 with them, and then made my total a 154.5. So I'm going to be in on this total under as well. 6-13, 6-14, Wake Forest and Virginia Tech do battle out there in the ACC tournament. Right now, Virginia Tech is a favorite of 2.5 points, and total on this game, going to be finding it at a 150.5 to a 151.5, and I do like the under. I set my total at a 149.5. Now, Wake Forest has actually been terrible in terms of their interior defense. They are outside the top 290 in terms of opponents' two-point shooting percentage, and they're just giving up way too many second and third chances. Teams in games played away from home for Wake Forest are grabbing 37.5% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. That is a bottom 25 mark in the country, but for Wake Forest, they have been able to do a pretty solid job in terms of generating turnovers, which is interesting because Virginia Tech, they're overall just a hair outside the top 100 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but the big thing for them is that they have been able to maximize possessions. For Virginia Tech, they're ranking about 60th in the country in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis on offense, and Wake Forest, not bad themselves. Overall, about 92nd in the country, and in games played away from home, they're actually a top 75 unit in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. Meanwhile, on the defensive side of things, Wake Forest has been a top 85 team in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis away from home, but for Wake Forest, even though you might have the actual best scorer in this game, Juke Harris, 21.5 points, 6.5 boards, he shoots 34% from three. I just feel like the lack of interior play is going to be hurting them. Now, you've got a Virginia Tech team that they themselves are outside the top 200 with regards to defensive rebound percentage, but a lot of that was without Toby Lowell, who's been able to give you about 12 points, 8 plus rebounds per game. Amani Hansberry is able to chip in there between 15 to 14 points per game, throws in there 8 boards. He's a mid-30s three-point shooter, and then that leaves Trevon Spillers to really need to step up for this team. 10.5 points, 5.5 rebounds per game. Team has still been dealing with the injury to Nate Calmezi, who was really the main facilitator for the team with about 5 assists per game. He tried to come back in February, just was unable to be very effective for the team, so that hurts them quite a bit. And then for Virginia Tech, I recognize that he hasn't taken off the way that some people would have liked, but Nicolas Zavadeus is still a 6'9", little bit of a point forward that's able to give you 12 points, 4.5 assists, shoots about 32% from 3. Would like to see the 67.5% free throw shooting be a little bit better. And for Virginia Tech, they themselves are outside the top 250 in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. Really lock it down from the outside, though. Teams are only shooting about 30.4% from 3 against them. That is a top 40 mark in the country, and Virginia Tech doesn't give you cheap opportunities to be able to score. They're a top 55 team in terms of fewest free throw attempts allowed on a per possession basis. This Wake Forest team will put you on the free throw line, and that's big because Wake Forest is a 77% free throw shooting team. That is a top 35 mark in the country, so I do think that Virginia Tech just going to be a little bit more efficient here, and even though both of these teams have been rough with their 2-point shooting defense, neither of these teams necessarily executing the best down low, so do like the under, my total 149.5, and with Virginia Tech, I'm willing to lay up to 3 with them. 6:15, 6:16, we now head to the Big Ten tournament out there in Chicago as Oregon and Maryland do battle. Maryland, an underdog of 3.5 points, 138.5 to 139.5 is the total. I do like this total to the over. I set my total at a 143.5 mainly because neither of these defenses have really been great this far this season, especially the Maryland defense. They are getting completely lambasted in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. These guys are hovering right around about 310th in all of college basketball. Meanwhile, you've got an Oregon team that certainly has hit the skids here recently, 237th in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but both teams grab second and third chances. Maryland rebounds 31.4% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. Oregon, right in that same neighborhood, they're 96th in terms of offensive rebound percentage. I think that that's going to help out a little bit, and neither team generates any sort of turnovers whatsoever. Both teams outside the top 225 with that regard. Maryland, as a matter of fact, down to 299th. And that's big because both of these teams have had a tough time taking care of the ball. Maryland 288th in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis on offense. Oregon right around about 255th as Jackson Shellstead being out for Oregon has just absolutely destroyed this team. You now have Nate Biddle back, which is big, and Biddle's been rock solid. About 16.5 points, 7 boards, 2.5 assists in the games where they've been able to either have upset bids or have been able to actually get the job done. He's been the reason why. Do have TK Simpkins, who shoots 36% from 3, 12.5 points per game, but this is not a team that's executing down low. They're outside the top 235 with regards to their 2-point shooting percentage. It's a group that, again, they have their turnover issues, and they're allowing quite a few second and third chances as well. They're outside the top 200 with regards to their defensive rebound percentage, and Maryland's another one of those teams that is very much allowing a lot of second and third chances as well, though. Having Solomon Washington back give you about 10.5 points, 9 rebounds per game. That is big for the team. It's a Maryland group that in terms of their defensive rebound percentage, right now they are about 118, so they've been a little bit better with this regard. Meanwhile, Oregon, 273rd. They're just giving up second and third chances, and that's a big reason why I'm willing to take the points here with Maryland. I set them as 1.5 point dog. I've got pretty much 2 teams here that I think are not great, to say the least, but you do have David Hewitt, who's able to go into inferno mode from time to time, 13.5 points, shoots 33% from 3. Andre 3000 Mills actually had himself a really nice game against Illinois where he had 30 points. He's come on strong, 14 plus points in each of the last 5 games. Overall for the season, shoots about 35.5% from 3-point. And I think that his development is going to do just enough for this Maryland team to remain lively. Maryland shoots about 72% at the free throw line, a little bit of pressure spot, and they're outside the top 275 with regards to their opponent's 2-point shooting percentage as well. This is an Oregon team that's about 72.6%, so both teams are in the same neighborhood there, and I do feel like Oregon should only be a slim favorite here. Set my line at 1.5, so we'll take 3 plus here with Maryland, and I do like the over, so I total 143.5, 6:17, 6:18. Penn State is going to be playing against Northwestern, and Northwestern does find themselves as a favorite here of 6 to 6.5 points. So on this game is 147.5 to 148.5. Made Northwestern the 6.5 point favorite. I'm willing to lay 6 and not a hair more. Obviously, with this being played out there in Chicago, if there is a team that has a little bit of a home court advantage, it is Northwestern, and it's a Northwestern team that, to their credit, they've done one thing very well. They've taken care of the ball. They're a top 5 team in the country in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis, so that helps out the cause. And this is a Penn State team that typically their defense is built around generating turnovers. They're right now 106th in the country in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis, which is down for their standards. And Penn State is just getting mollywopped in every single way on defense. They are outside the top 355 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis away from home. If you include D1 and non-D1 games, they're in the bottom 5 in terms of both opponents' 2-point and 3-point shooting percentages. They don't put you at the free throw line, which I guess that's a good thing, but they're not grabbing second and third chances outside the top 3 in terms of offensive rebound percentage. You only have one guy on the roster, Ivan Jurcic, who gives you over 4.1 rebounds per game. He also does chip in there 10 points per game, and Freddie De Leon, Caden Mingo, they've been able to combine for 27.7 points per game, but they combine to shoot less than 30% from 3-point range as well. And for Northwestern, they've got by far the best player out there on the floor. That would be Nick Martinelli. Now, what you're going to be able to get outside the 22.7 points, 6 boards, and 41% 3-point shooting of Nick Martinelli is TBD, but at the very least, you have that. You've got Jaden Reed, who's been able to dole out 4.7 assists per game. Arrington Page, 10 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. Northwestern getting killed on the glass are outside the top 250 with regards to their rebound percentage, and they've been a country average team in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage, top 200 in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. Doesn't sound great, but in comparison to Penn State, it's actually really, really good, and neither of these teams are looking to bump up their tempo too much. Penn State 273rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Northwestern 314. So I set a total here of a 146.5. I do like the 148.5 to the under, and I'm willing to lay up to 6 here with Northwestern. 619, 620, Missouri State and Florida National do battle from Huntsville, Alabama for the Conference USA tournament. Florida National, a 1 to 1.5 point underdog in most spots. Some places have them as the slim 1-point favorite. 153.5 to 154 is the total, and I do like the under. I set my total at a 115.5. Dueling tempos here, as for Florida National, this is one of the most up-tempo teams in all of college basketball, top 30 team in terms of total possessions per game. Missouri State is 208th, and Missouri State just has not been able to do a great job in terms of disallowing second and third chances, neither has Florida National. Missouri State 224th in terms of defensive rebound percentage. Florida National is finding themselves outside the top 3 with this regard, so that has been relatively brutal. They're allowing teams in games played away from them to grab about 33.3% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound, but Florida National has been the better team in terms of giving themselves those second and third chances. They are grabbing about 31.6% of their misses as an offensive rebound. That is 82nd in the country, and it's a Florida National team that is a better 3-point shooting team. You've got Missouri State right now shooting from 3-point range only about 32.4%. That is 262nd. Florida National 35%. That's 123rd, and this is a Florida National team that does a great job in terms of generating turnovers. They're still a top 30 team in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. You've got from the meat road runners of Cal State Bakersfield, Corey Stevenson coming in doing a nice job for the team. 18 points, 6 half boards from 3-point range. He's been launching at about a 40% clip. Julia Mackey shoots 37% from 3, 12.5 points per game now. Florida National in a pressure spot, they shoot 69.1% in the free throw line. Missouri State shoots below 68%, and for Missouri State, they've been able to get quite a bit of production out of Keith Pallick, who's been able to give you 18 points per game, and pretty much the lone guys have been able to shoot from 3-point range for this team have the last name Williams. Kobe Williams, 14.5 points per contest. He's been shooting 37.5% from 3. Trey Williams shoots 35.5% from the outside. He's up to about 9 points per game, and then you do have Michael O.C. Benusu, 15 points, 7.5 boards, a little bit over a steal per contest, but I do think that with the way that this bunch in Florida National generates turnovers and just the lack of outside shooting that you've got for Missouri State, and additionally, they're outside the top 2 with their own 3-point shooting percentage defense as well. I think that is going to be just enough for this bunch to be able to get the job done. So I did set Florida National as the favorite here of more like 2.5 points. So I'm going to be willing to take a shot here on Florida National, whether that be as a money line underdog or as a 1-point favorite. And with this total set mine at a 150.5, so I do like the under. 621, 622, New Mexico State is going to be playing against Jacksonville St. So on this game, it is 141.5, and right now with New Mexico State, they're between 1 to 1.5 point favorites, and with New Mexico State, I set them as a 1.5 point favorite. The 1 is the absolute max, and I'm going to be willing to lay, but I am willing to lay 1, even though it's a New Mexico State team that hasn't been quite the same team defensively this year than they've been in the past. This should be a rather low-tempo game for New Mexico State, hovering right around about 220th in terms of total possessions per game. Jacksonville State, they are 291st, and for New Mexico State, overall, they're 188th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but if you look at games played away from home, that does ascend into the top 135. Meanwhile, for this Jacksonville State team, they've been able to do a pretty solid job with their own defense. They are a top 120 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis and games played away from home. That does ascend to the top 75, but for Jacksonville State, they've been a solid 3-point shooting team all season long, 66 at 35.9%. That takes a massive dive away from home. 39.8% at home, 31.4% away from home, with New Mexico State being a top 100 team in games played away from home in terms of their defensive rebound percentage. I like what they've been able to get out of their main guy in Jabel Jones. He's from the Meet Me Road Runners of Cal State Bakersfield, 18 points, 4.5 boards, 2.5 assists. He shoots 38% from 3. Julius Mims has been able to throw in there about 8.5 rebounds per game. And then you do have Elijah Elliott along with Jalen Randall, who combined for about 17.5 points per contest. So these guys have all been able to do a pretty rock solid job. And for New Mexico State, they're still a top 125 team as well in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. On the flip side, you do have a Jacksonville St team that does have probably the best overall score in this game, as Mustafa El Montequil has been able to throw in there 19.5 points, 7 boards per contest, and then he's surrounded by some pretty solid shooters. Jamar Franklin has been able to shoot about 38% from 3, 6.5 points per contest, dealt with a little bit of ailment towards the middle part of the season, but he's all good to go here. Meanwhile, AC Bryan up to about 12 points, 4 boards. He shoots 39.5% from 3-point. Marcus Fitzgerald has been a bit of a mixer and shaker as well, but if it's a tight game, this Jacksonville State team, they shoot 68.6% at the free throw line. That hovers right around about 300th in all of college basketball. Additionally, this team is not finishing on the inside. They're outside the top 275 with their own 2-point shooting percentage. I think that's going to keep you under. I saw by total 133.5, and with New Mexico State willing to lay 1 point and not a half a point more. 623, 624 on the card. This is a CAA final. Now we go to a game without numbers. 623, 624. It is Monmouth and Hofstra doing battle for the CAA title. No numbers up on this game, but I've got my handicap. With Monmouth, 4.5 or more taking the points with them. Hofstra, I'm willing to lay up to 3.5 with, as I did set Hofstra as a 4-point favorite, and then made a total of 134. So 133.5 or less in on the over, 134.5 or higher, the under. For Monmouth, they've gotten a reinforcement, and after missing the first 23 games of the season, Kavion McLean has been their top scorer with darn near 16 points per contest. Over at Texas Southern last season, he was able to be a nice 3-point shooter for them, gave them 4.5 assists per game, and he's doing the exact same thing here for Monmouth. So it's been able to bump up an offense that has been rather pedestrian this year. For Monmouth, they're outside the top 300 with regards to their 2-point shooting percentage. Now they have been a top 125 team in terms of their 3-point shooting percentage. Not necessarily a fast team, not super slow. 233rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Hofstra's playing at a slow and steady pace. They're about 307th in terms of total possessions per game, and in games played away from home, entering into the game yesterday against Towson, shooting 38.1% from 3-point range. That is a top 40 mark in all of college basketball. That compares with Monmouth, who shoots about 35.9%, and that's a top 50 mark in and of itself. Now, for this Monmouth team, they've been a top 50 team in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis, as they have a lot of guys with active hands on the roster. With Jack Collins, the point guard, 7.5 points, 5 boards, 4.5 assists, 2.5 per contest, does a little bit of everything. And they're also a good shot blocking team, top 50 team with this regard. Jason Rivera Torres, 16 points, pair of steals, 8 rebounds, nearly a block and a half per contest. And the Doc Mortar, he really doesn't give you a lot in terms of scoring or anything, but does provide a little bit over a block per game. Now, they do run into a Hofstra team that has been a top 10 team in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. They are giving up second and third chances, so they've been outside the top 250 with regards to defensive rebound percentage. For Hofstra, you've got Cruz Davis, who's been able to cruise his way to being able to shoot nearly 40% for 3, a little bit over 20 points per game. Hofstra also very solid in terms of taking care of the ball away from home as well. In road/neutral games, this is a top 100 team in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. You got Preston Eadman, who's been able to give you 15.5 points, 4.5 assists per contest. With Hofstra, they are also doing a nice job in terms of guarding the perimeter. They're a top 85 team with regards to opponents' 3-point shooting percentage. They themselves have been outside the top 250 with their own 2-point shooting percentage, but in a pressure spot, these guys do shoot about 74% at the free throw line. Hofstra not going to put you under duress. They're outside the top 275 with regards to turnovers on a per possession basis. And then you've got a Monmouth team that shoots about 74% at the charity stripe as well. So circumstance where I'm going to be willing to lay up to 3.5 here with Hofstra, 4.5 or more, taking the points with Monmouth, and then set a total to where a 133.5 or less. I like the over, 134.5 or higher, the under. Now we go to the Horizon League tournament, 625, 626. Wright State and Detroit do battle. I've got my handicap as this is a game that is off the board. I made Wright State the 5-point favorite. I'm willing to lay up to 4.5 with them, 5.5 or more. Take the points with Detroit. And then 148.5 or less will be a buy point for me on the over. 149.5 or higher, the under. You've got a Detroit team that actually led the Horizon League in conference play in terms of their 3-point shooting, but they've been a little bit inconsistent with that outside shooting when they've been away from home. At home, this is a group that has been shooting over 38.5% from 3-point range, but in a road/neutral court setting, that goes all the way down to 32.1%. Meanwhile, you've got a Wright State team that entered in yesterday, just a flamethrower from 3-point range away from home, 40.6%. That is a top 5 mark in all of college basketball, and Wright State should be able to do a solid job on the glass. Fully recognize that you've got a group in Detroit that has been a top 70 team with with regards to percentage of the missed shots that result in an offensive rebound. Wright State has been about a country average team with regards to that defensive rebound percentage, but still, you've got Michael Emirajeh, who's been able to give you 12.7 rebounds per game. Kellen Pickett, he's done a nice job being able to supply the team with about 5.5 rebounds per game. And then the ancillary guys are really your main three-point shooters in Solomon Kaglin, Dominic Pangonis. They combine for 19.2 points, both shoot above 38% for three. And then Michael Cooper, he's out of the sink when it comes to backcourt. 13.5 points, pair of assists, shoots 36.5% from three-point range. And Wright State, where you can get this team, is on the inside. They have been outside the top 250 with regards to opponents' two-point shooting percentage, while they themselves are a top 85 team with their own two-point shooting percentage, but Detroit has been lackluster there as well. They are hovering right around about 300th with their own two-point shooting percentage in terms of opponents' two-point shooting percentage outside the top 250 with that regard as well. But Detroit, if they're in a pressure spot, they do shoot 77.2% at the free throw line with a guy in Orlando Lovejoy who's been able to do a nice job in terms of leading the way. Wright State, by the way, 73.5% at the free throw line. But for Lovejoy, even though he's not a guy that really bombs from three, 15 points, 89% at the free throw line. And then you've got TJ Nidu, who's been able to shoot 46% from three. Tyler Spratt has been a 39% three-point shooter. Not a ton down low outside of Legend Geeter, who's been able to get her done with 8.6 rebounds per game. And then Ryan Kellenby has been able to throw in there about 5 rebounds per game as well. But that said, it is a Detroit team that has been able to pick up steam here in conference play. Problem is they don't really put you under duress outside the top 3 with regards to turnovers generated on a per possession basis. Wright State more of a country average team in terms of generating those turnovers. So to make my line to where I'm willing to lay up to 4.5 here with Wright State 5.5 or more, I'm going to be willing to take those points with Detroit, and then a 148.5 or less in on the over, 149.5 or higher, the under 6.7, 6.8. This is the Metro Atlantic final. You've got yourself Siena, and they're going to be taking on Merrimack, and the Merry Men of Merrimack do find themselves as a favorite here of 3.5 points. 127.5 to 128 is the total. I did set my total at 127.5. Personally, if I were put between a 127 to a 128, personally, I would rather take the 128 under rather than the 127 over, mainly because, man, these are two teams that are not playing very up-tempo whatsoever in terms of Siena. In terms of possessions per game, 359th in all of college basketball. Merrimack is 357th. Now, I do think that this is going to be close enough for late falls, and you do have a Merrimack team that is a top 5 team in the country with their free throw shooting percentage at over 79%, but Siena, in terms of free throw attempts allowed on a per possession basis, they are a top 30 team in the country. I think that wins out here. I do like Siena on the money line. I'd set them as a 1.5 point favorite, mainly because they are going to be able to win the battle on the glass. Merrimack is a bottom 10 team in the country with regards to overall rebound percentage. Siena, they're hovering right around 110th, and Siena's been really good in terms of being able to grab some second and third chances for themselves in games played away from home, a top 125 team with regards to the offensive rebound percentage, and got a guy in Gavin Doty who's been able to do a nice job leading this offense. He supplies just under 17.5 points per game, 7 boards, and then Justice Schultz in the backcourt, 13.5 points, 4.5 assists. He shoots 38% from three. Now, Siena overall, they shoot just 30.6% from three. That's outside the top 3 in all of college basketball. Shot a little bit closer to 33% in conference play. And then on the flip side for Merrimack, not like this is a very prolific offense. They're outside the top 225 in terms of points per possession away from home. And away from home, they shoot just 30.8% from three-point range, and they're going to have a little bit of a tough time standing up to all the size that you've got. Antonio Chandler, I know that he's been dealing with a few eligibility concerns, and that's been a little bit of an issue, but even throughout the tournament, they've been just fine without him. And then on the flip side for Merrimack, you've got 2 guys, KVR Kennedy, Ernest Shelton, who have done a nice job stepping up as the main scorers with a combined about 34.3 points per game, with Shelton shoots 35% from three. Todd Brogna was a little bit of a disappointment towards the beginning part of the season, but that's now giving you a block, 6 points, right around about 5 rebounds per game. And even though Merrimack doesn't really execute on the inside, they're outside the top 270 with their own 2-point shooting percentage. They've been a top 55 team in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage, and surprisingly, for as bad as they are on the glass, they're a really good shot blocking team. Casey Ugakazi leads the way with 2 blocks per contest. They're a top 25 team in terms of their shot block percentage. You do have a Siena team that they themselves have been able to do a pretty solid job down low, though, and I do think that with Siena just having a little bit more in terms of the boards, with this Siena team being a team that has been a top 150 team in terms of both opponents' 2-point and 3-point shooting percentage, and they also shoot 76.5% of the free throw line. They get the job done here. Set Siena as a 1.5 point favorite. I'd like them on the money line, and at a 128 or higher in on the under, set my total 127.5. 629, 630 on the card. It is Santa Clara, and they're going to be taking on Gonzaga. This game does not have any numbers because Santa Clara won their game at quite literally 11 o'clock p.m. Pacific time, but I've got my handicap. I did set Gonzaga as a 5.5 point favorite, so we'll delay up to 5 with them, 6 or more to get the points with Santa Clara. Made a total of a 157.5, so 157 or less in on the over, 158 or higher the under. I recognize that Gonzaga's forte this year has actually been defense. They've been a top 5 team in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Gonzaga has done a great job both in terms of guarding the inside and the outside. They're 37th in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage. That does go up to 34.4% from 3-point range away from home, though, compared to 26.6% at home. But Santa Clara is not necessarily the same 3-point shooting team that they've been in past seasons. For Santa Clara, this team is shooting overall about 34.9% from 3, but what they've been able to really do a good job of beefing up with is 2 things: generating turnovers and being able to grab second and third chances. In terms of their offensive rebound percentage of missed shots that do become an offensive rebound, Santa Clara is 18th in the country. They grab about 35.2% of their misses as an offensive rebound. Gonzaga is 33rd. They grab about 34% of their misses, and Gonzaga 13th in terms of defensive rebound percentage. Santa Clara does allow a lot of second and third chances. They're 271st. Over 30% of opponents' missed shots do become an offensive rebound, and both of these teams have both been able to generate quite a few turnovers, and both are relatively solid in terms of ball security. Gonzaga has been a top 75 team in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis on offense. Santa Clara, though, 19th in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. Gonzaga 17th, and for Gonzaga, the defense has been there, but the offense has taken a little bit of a dive ever since they lost Braden Huff. It's been all up to Graham Ike, 19.5 points, 8.5 boards, 2.5 assists per contest. Tying Grant Fresser, while he gives you 11 points, 5 rebounds per game, not going to give you any sort of outside shooting. And for Gonzaga, they're shooting 34% from 3, neither here nor there. They're really looking to the inside to be able to generate their offense, and they're still a top 15 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis in a road/future court environment. And Gonzaga still playing fast, 74th in terms of total possessions per game. Santa Clara overall is about 120th. They've slowed down a little bit more here in the last few games, but they were really getting things cranked up in conference play, and they've been able to have quite a few guys be able to step up. Bucky Oboye has been really good down low for the team. He only gives you about 8.5 points, but he's able to give you right around about 4.5 boards, a little bit over a block per contest. He's been a nice starter and a little bit more defensive stopper for them. And then Alan Graves has been able to come in off the bench. He's been doing a bit of everything at about 6'9", 11.5 points, 6.5 boards from 3-point range. He's firing it in at more than 40%. You've also had Elijah Mai be able to give you 14 points along Christian Hammond, and Hammond is one of the main 3-point shooters. And even though he doesn't give you a lot of scoring, Jake Amsinger, he's been able to give you 6.5 points, 5.5 boards, 3 assists, just a little bit of a do-it-all guy that really helps out a Santa Clara team that they've been able to feast on the inside. This has been a team that, in terms of their 2-point shooting percentage, has been quite solid to go along with those second and third chances, as right now they're checking in right around about the top 45 with regards to their 2-point shooting percentage. So interesting little bit of a circumstance here. I do think that it comes down to late fouls. So 157 or less in on the over, 158 or higher the under. One delay up to 5 with Gonzaga, 6 or more. Going to be willing to take those points with Santa Clara. 631, 632. Montana and Portland State are doing battle out there in the Big Sky tournament. Initial line was Montana as an underdog of 2.5 points, and total on this game 141.5. I'm willing to lay with Portland State. I don't want to go past the 3. I did set my line at 3.5, but I'm going to be willing to lay that number. It is a Montana team that, for my liking, is just too sloppy with the ball. Outside the top 330 in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis, they certainly can bomb it from 3-point range. Away from home, they are shooting 37.1% from 3-point range. That is a top 40 mark in all of college basketball. It's a Portland State team that really is not going to be some sort of a prolific 3-point shooting team. 33.8% away from home. That's just a hair inside the top 175. But for Portland State, you do have 2 main guys that do a nice job in terms of leading the charge, as you've been able to have Scary Terry Miller be that main scorer with 19 points, 5.5 boards, 3.5 assists, steal per contest. He shoots 40% from 3. Jalen Henderson shoots below 30% from 3, but does a nice job around the offense. 18 points, 6 assists per game. Trayvon Minute has been able to give you 8.5 rebounds at about 10 points per game. He's really the, shall we say, main man down low for the team. And then you have mixers and shakers like Kelsey Phipps, who only gives you like 4.5 points and like an assist per contest, but he does a nice job as a little bit of a defensive stopper for a Portland State team, in which their offense, I'm not going to call it awful, but it's certainly not amazing. They're only about 223rd in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but this has been a unit that has been one of the best mid-major defenses in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. 45th in the country, top 75 team in terms of both opponents' 2-point and 3-point shooting percentage. And for Montana, this group is about 225th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, though you do have money on your side. Money Williams, he has been incredible at the point guard spot. Does turn the ball over more than what you'd like, but 19.5 points, 4 boards, 5 assists on about 34% 3-point shooting, and a lot of nice ancillary 3-point shooters around him. Tyler Thompson shoots 40% for 3 with about 8.5 points. Trayshawn Sawyer, he's pretty much a lone guy on the team that gives you over 4.5 rebounds per game, 5.5 boards, 11.5 points per contest, shoots about 36% from 3, and for Montana. If they can find a way to get to the free throw line, they shoot 76.8% while they're there, but it is a Montana group that they just have had a very difficult time in terms of taking care of the ball and won't give themselves second and third chances. Bottom 10 team in terms of percentage of their missed shots that result in an offensive rebound, so I'm willing to lay up to 3 here with Portland State, and I did set my total 139.5, so at a 140 plus, I'm in on the under. This is the last game on the normal Las Vegas betting board before we hit the extra games, 633, 634. You've got Idaho, and the Vandals are hoping to vandalize Bankroll, says they're going up against Eastern Washington. This is another game without numbers, but I've got my handicap. Made Idaho the 3.5 point favorite, so going to be willing to lay up to 3 with them. 4 more taking the points with Eastern Washington, and then made a total of a 153.5. So 153 or less, like the over, 154 or higher, the under. For Eastern Washington, they're fast but not aggressively fast, 161st in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Idaho, relatively similar team, 137th, but you have an Eastern Washington team that has not necessarily been the most stout defensive team. 305th going into yesterday in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis overall. You look in a road/neutral venue that goes outside the top 320, and Idaho's been able to step it up a little bit more defensively. They still give up some looks from 3, but overall they've been a top 110 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis in a road/neutral venue. Now, you do have a Eastern Washington team that's a top 100 team in terms of points per possession with Isaiah Moses shooting over 40% for 3. He's been able to supply the team with about 18 points per game, and again, it is an Idaho team that has really been giving it up from 3-point range. They are allowing teams to shoot over 35% from the outside overall, but you do have an Idaho team that as well has been able to have a lot of guys just be able to step up into tandem and be able to give this team some relatively good production. You've got Colton Mitchell, who's been able to supply about 13 points per game. Jackson Rasmussen has been able to give you a lot of the same as well, and they brought in Brody Woodbury, who's really been able to turn the fortunes for this team down low, has helped them be more of a top 100 team with regards to opponents' 2-point shooting percentage, be able to give you a few shot blocks, and he's been able to do a nice job in terms of just being able to elevate this unit. Meanwhile, on the flip side for Eastern Washington, Kyrie Huey along with Alton Hamilton, these guys do combine for about 11 rebounds per game, but for Eastern Washington, they were actually really good in terms of guarding the perimeter when they were at home. Less than 31% is what teams shot from 3, more like 37% away from home. You do have JoJo Anderson, who's been able to supply the team with about 7.5 points. He does give you about 37.5% 3-point shooting, and it has been an Eastern Washington team that has been able to do an okay job on the inside. They're a top 150 team with their own 2-point shooting percentage outside the top 300 with regards to opponents' 2-point shooting percentage, Joe, and I do think that the just turnover issues that the team has had for Eastern Washington, they are outside the top 240 with regards to ball security. I do think that that's going to be a little bit costly, and if Idaho needs to cover this game at the free throw line, about country average, they shoot 73.6% at the free throw line. They're a top 120 team in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis, so 3 or less, I'm going to be willing to lay with Idaho. 4 or more, take the points with Eastern Washington. 153 or less, in on the over, 154 or higher, the under, and now we hit the extra games.
The normal betting board picks are complete, but there are some extra games today, so we go into the bonus.
306-547, 306-548. You've got Alcorn St. They're going to be playing against Prairie View. This is for the SWAC tournament out there in Georgia. Prairie View opens up a 4.5 to a 5.5 point favorite total on this game, 145.5 to 146.5, and I like the over. I did set my total at a 149.5. You've got a Prairie View team that has been playing incredibly up-tempo. They're 14th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Alcorn State is not like ridiculously fast, but they're looking to push a little bit of tempo as well. 141st in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Should be able to get some dead possessions in this game. Alcorn State, they are 74th in the country in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. Meanwhile, Prairie View, they are 35th in the country, and for Prairie View, this has traveled very well. In games played away from them, that does ascend into the top 30, and for Alcorn State, their forte is being able to pop it from 3 away from them. In games played away from them, they actually shoot 36.7% from 3, less than 26% from 3-point range at home, though, so I have to wonder if that irons out a little bit. Both of these teams should be able to get a lot of opportunities to be able to score with the clock stopped, as for Alcorn State, 292nd in the country in terms of free throw attempts allowed on a per field goal attempted by opponent's basis. For Prairie View, they're about 343rd, but Prairie View is a better free throw shooting team in this game, as they've been able to shoot over 75% as collective, top 75 mark in the country. Alcorn State more around about 70.5%, and for Alcorn State, they're just getting lambasted down low. This team is outside the top 345 with their own 2-point shooting percentage, and are nice already 359th with regards to opponents' 2-point shooting percentage, and Tyson McDaniels, he's been the main guy, give you about 12.6 rebounds per game. Shane Lancaster, he's able to supply about 11.3 points per game, pair of assists. Jameel Morris has been able to give you about 10 points, 3 assists per game, but I mean, it doesn't take away from the fact that this team is very, very fragile down low, and typically Prairie View has had a disadvantage with regards to their rebounding and in the post, but in this case, they've got a very nice advantage, and it's a Prairie View team that they look to pile drive the ball down low. They're a top 30 team in terms of percentage of their field goal attempts that come from inside the three-point line, and they've got a guy in Dante Horn who's really been able to step up, give the team about 20 points, 4.5 boards, 3 assists per game. If you look in conference play only, 24.4 points per game. They put a lot on his shoulders because Tayron Joseph has been out for the last month or so. He was averaging 20-plus points per game, but not much of a drop-off with the way that Horn has stepped up. Corey Wells, he does a good job in terms of giving you about 13.7 boards. He shoots in the mid-30s from three. Lance Williams has stepped up, shooting 40% for three, 9.5 points, 3 assists per game. It's a Prairie View team that does a better job in terms of taking care of the ball. They're still outside the top 240 in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis on offense, but Alcorn St, they are well outside the top 330 with this regard, so I do think that Prairie View is going to be able to win out here. I am going to be willing to lay with Prairie View. I set them as a 5.5 point favorite, so willing to go up to 5 with them. I like the over, so my total at a 149.5, 306.549, 306.550. Grambling and Jackson State do battle. This is a game without numbers because the Grambling game against Mississippi Valley State wrapped up a little bit late, but I've got my handicap. I did set Grambling as a 2.5 point favorite. I'm willing to lay up to 2 with them. 3 or more take the points with Jackson State. Then set a total here of a 145.5. So 145 or less, I'm in on the over. 146 or higher, the under. For Jackson State, it's all been rough for this team this season. They are outside the top 320 in terms of both points scored and points allowed on a per possession basis, and just a massive split in terms of their offense when they've been at home rather than away from home. For the Jackson State team, they're actually a top 135 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis when they're at home. When they're away from home, they go into the bottom 20 in all of college basketball. Meanwhile, for Grambling, they've been 332nd in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but they get to go up against a Jackson State team that really has not been able to guard anything to save their lives. With Jackson State in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, 346th, and they just don't have a lot in the post, and that's where this Grambling team should be able to really just be able to take hold. You've got Roderick Coffey, who's got a lot of versatility, 11 points, 4.5 boards, 4 assists, and from 3-point, he shoots about 36% from the outside. Grambling leaving something to be desired with their outside shooting. They're shooting less than 31% as a collective, but you've been able to have Jamel Lane be able to give you 4.5 rebounds per game. Devin Franklin is up to about 4.4 boards per contest, so this team is going to do a solid job fighting for some second and third chances, and they've been able to do a solid job in terms of not allowing great looks from three. They're a top 135 team in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage. Meanwhile, you've got a Jackson State team that has the top scorer in this game, Deshaun Ruffin, 23.5 points, 5.3 assists per contest. He only shoots about 31% from 3-point range. Jamie Mitchell, Dorian McMillan, these two guys have been able to combine for about 26.5 points per game between the two of them, about 9.5 boards, 2.5 assists per game. Dejounte Thomas has been able to step up with about 5.7 rebounds per game, but he's pretty much a lone guy on the roster. It gives you over 4.5 rebounds per game for Jackson State. They're outside the top 275 in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage, outside the top 300 with regards to opponents' 2-point shooting percentage as well. And with this team having such a tough time taking care of the ball, they are outside the top 330 in terms of ball security. Grambling, top 20 team in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis away from home. That should allow Grambling to be a bit of a favorite here. So I'm willing to lay up to 2 with Grambling, 3 or more, taking the points with Jackson State, and then 145 or less in on the over, 146 or higher, the under. 306.551, 306.552. This is the NEC final. Mercyhurst and Long Island. Long Island, the home team, a 5.5 to a 6.5 point favorite. 136 after 137.5 is the total. And with Long Island, I did set them as a favorite of 7.5 points. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. Now, Long Island is going to the NCAA tournament regardless of whether or not they win this game. And I have to think that Mercyhurst is going to have a lot of pride. It is a Mercyhurst team that's been solid with their defense. They're overall, for the season, 78th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They don't necessarily have a ton of size, but they're not the world's worst team in terms of disallowing second and third chances. Top 165 team in terms of defensive rebound percentage. LIU's given up second and third chances, 263rd in the country in terms of defensive rebound percentage, but they're also a top 75 team with regards to their offensive rebound percentage, and it's going to be a little bit of strength on strength because this is a Long Island team that when they've been at home this season, they have really been able to bomb it from three. They shoot 39% from 3-point range in their home games. That is a top 35 mark in all of college basketball. Meanwhile, on the flip side, you do have a Mercyhurst team that they're allowing teams to shoot from 3-point range at a pretty minuscule number of right around about 32% overall. That's a top 75 mark in the country, and with this Mercyhurst team, they've been able to get quite a bit out of Mike Colas, Ivan Auskis, along Kadir Martin. Martin is able to give you about 2.5 blocks per contest, 6+ rebounds per game. Ivan Auskis is up to about 5.5 rebounds per game. Flip side for Long Island, you've got really a big three for this team. Greg Gecko Gordon has done a nice job, giving you about 14 points, 5.5 boards, and then Malachi Davis throws in their 14 points, 3.5 assists per contest. Jamal Fuller, he's a top 3-point shooter, 16 points. He shoots 44% from 3-point range. Jamo Goings has been able to give you about 30% three-point shooting as well. And then flip side for Mercyhurst, the backcourt play has been pretty solid with their main two scorers, as you've got 17.5 points and about 2.5 assists per contest out of Birdie Blunt, who shoots 34.5% from three. Jake Levelman shoots 39.5% from the outside, and both do shoot over 86% at the free throw line. Mercyhurst has been a top 75 team in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. Long Island is outside the top 320 with their ball security, but I do think that Long Island, all the just power and strength that they've got in the inside and being on their home floor is able to get the job done here. So I did set Long Island as a favorite of 7.5 points. I'm willing to lay up to 7 with them. Made my total a 137.5. I think that this is close enough for late fellas, so at the 136.5, I do like the over. 306.553, 306.554. UMass Lowell is on the road against UMBC, and UMBC a 6.5 to a 7.5 point favorite. 146, so 146.5 is the total, and for UMBC, I set them as an 8.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. Now, UMass Lowell has been a really good team in terms of disallowing second and third chances when they've been at home. Away from home, the defense just sort of disintegrate a little bit, and it's a UMass Lowell team that has been a top 200 team with regards to opponent's three-point shooting percentage. They're not the world's worst team in terms of guarding the arc. UMBC is just better in so many different categories, so UMBC has become a top 25 team in terms of defensive rebound percentage. They're not allowing second and third chances. Teams are shooting only about 32.7% from three against them. That's a top 110 mark in the country, and UMass Lowell is still well outside the top 175 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and this is a UMBC team that very much can bomb from three-point range overall for the season, shooting about 35.8%. That's a top 100 mark in the country. DJ Turner, Up Armstrong, Ace Valentine, these two guys give you a combined about 24.5 points per game. Both shoot above 40% from three. UMBC also in a pressure spot. They shoot 75.9% at the free throw line. That's a top 60 mark in the country. UMass Lowell's in the bottom 10. They shoot less than 66.5% at the free throw line, and UMBC is not going to put you under duress. They're outside the top 290 in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. Top 45 team in terms of their ball security. Judge Lyle King has been able to give you about 14 points per game, so he's helped out with that. Josh Odowondo is able to give you 8.5 points, 5 boards per contest, and then Jose Robert Chachwin has been able to throw in there about 5.5 boards per contest as well. And then for this Massachusetts Lowell team, they were dealing with a little bit of an injury to their top rebounder, Austin Green. He's come back to be able to give you 13.5 points, 8 boards, and then Anel Montas has really been able to come on strong, 15.5 points, 5.5 boards. Does only shoot about 30% from three. Again, it is a UMass Lowell team that has some pretty big home and road splits. They're looking to pile drive the ball down, though. They're a top 50 team in terms of percentage of their field goal attempts that come from inside the three-point line, but it's a UMBC team that has been a top 125 team with regards to opponent's two-point shooting percentage. Additionally, it's a UMass Lowell team that's outside the top 260 with regards to opponent's two-point shooting percentage, so do think that this UMBC team finds a way to be able to get the job done, and UMBC has really slowed down their tempo this year to 188th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, so set a total here of a 146.5. I was seeing a 147 before, and if I'm put between a 147 to a 146, would rather have a 147 under rather than 146 to the over to go along with UMBC. I'm willing to lay up to 8 with them. 306.555, 306.556. NJIT is on the road against Vermont. Vermont does find themselves as 11.5 to 12.5 point favorites. It's all scheme 136 to 137.5, and I set my total at a 137.5, so 137 or less. I'm in on the over now. Recognize that these two teams are not really playing with a lot of tempo. Vermont, especially 345th in terms of total possessions per game. NJIT more around about 226th, and for NJIT, they've been able to do a nice job in terms of guarding the three-point line. Games played away from them. Teams are shooting just 32.3% from three against them. That is a top 85 mark in the country, and they are NJIT is 345th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. So all sorts of rough there. They've been outside the top 300 with regards to rebound percentage. I do think that that's a little bit of a misleading number because they were without for the first 13 or so games of the season one of their main forwards in Melvin Ikong Bully, who's been able to supply 7.5 points, 5.5 rebounds per game. And then Sebastian Robinson. He doesn't really pop it from three, but he's been able to give this team overall this season 14.5 points per game. Dealt with injury towards the beginning part of the season and has been able to really reach full peak mode here in conference play, where he's been able to give the team 17 points per game. And in conference play, this is an NJIT team that has been averaging about 71 points per game, even though they only shoot about 30.5% from three-point range, because they've been able to do a solid job executing down low. And in conference play, only turned the ball over about 8.4 times per game, and that's a big thing with this game. Neither of these teams generate any turnovers whatsoever, as Vermont, in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis, while outside the top 320 there. They're also a top 40 team in terms of protecting the ball, and they've been a top 85 unit in terms of their two-point shooting percentage with Gus Yalden give you 16.5 points, shoots 37% from three. The TJs, TJ Long, TJ Hurley, they combine for 27.2 points per game, with Hurley being your sharpshooter, 88% the free throw line, 39.5% from three-point range. So I do think that for Vermont, they should be able to do a nice job being able to slice and dice through an NJIT team that just has not been stout down low in terms of opponents' two-point shooting percentage as well. They're outside the top 150 with that regard. They're giving up a lot of second and third chances. They're outside the top 275 with that regard. So do think that for Vermont, they do just enough to be able to get you the over in this spot. Semi-total 137.5. Now, we are starting to see 12 and 12.5. That I feel like goes a little bit too far. As Vermont outside the top 240 with regards to their own three-point shooting percentage on defense as well. So 12 plus is my buy point on NJIT to go along with the over. And then final two games are out there in the South on 306-557, 306-558. Stone Cold Stephen F. Austin. They're going to be playing against Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi had to survive and advance to be able to get here. In a lot of places, you're not seeing numbers up on this game, but I do have my handicap as for Texas A&M Corpus Christi. I did set them as an underdog of 8.5 points. So 9 or more, I'm going to be willing to take the points with Texas A&M Corpus Christi. At a 8 or less, I'm going to be willing to lay with Stone Cold Stephen F. Austin. And with regards to the total, I set mine to where a 134 or less. I like the over 135 or higher. The under have a Corpus Christi team that's right around about 260th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Stephen F. Austin, more around about 289th. And this Stephen F. Austin defense has been absolutely magnificent this year. Stephen F. Austin is 5th in the country in terms of opponents' three-point shooting percentage at 29.4%. They've been a top 75 team with regards to rebound percentage in terms of just raw points allowed on a per possession basis, 21st in all of college basketball, and in games played away from home in a roadside court setting, that goes into the top 10. Meanwhile, you've got a Texas A&M Corpus Christi team that they themselves are a top 35 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis away from home. Corpus Christi, with regards to their three-point shooting, it's been neither here nor there throughout much of the season. They shoot 33.8% from the outside. That's about 184th in all of college basketball. Stephen F. Austin, they do shoot about 36.4% from three-point. That's a top 50 mark in the country. Now, if you do have one trepidation with this Stone Cold Stephen F. Austin team, they are outside the top 3 with their free throw shooting percentage. And this is a Corpus Christi team that they sort of gamble for turnovers. They're a top 45 team in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. And that leads to a lot of fouls. They're in the top 30 in terms of fouls committed and in terms of free throw attempts allowed on a per possession basis. And they're relying upon Nicholas Shanbunyo in the backcourt, who's been able to give you about 12 points, shoots 42% from three. Sheldon Williams has been rock solid down low, 12 points, 7 rebounds per game. You've got Kenker Evan, who's been able to give you about 6 points, 5 rebounds per game. Has been dealing with the elements throughout the season, but he should be all good to go here. Meanwhile, for this Stone Cold Stephen F. Austin team, it has been all about what you've been able to get out of the man in Keon Thompson, who came over from UMass. 18 points, 4.5 assists, steal per contest. He only shoots about 31% from three, but Narat Kivajavanic has been able to shoot 40% from three, 9.5 points per contest. Cam Burton has been a 44% three-point shooter. Jared Colonel is able to give you about 2.5 blocks per contest. It's a Stephen F. Austin team that is outside the top 240 with their own two-point shooting percentage, but top 100 team with regards to opponents' two-point shooting percentage. They do an amazing job in terms of taking care of the ball, which really unravels the forte they've got for Corpus Christi. They're a top 30 team with regards to fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. Meanwhile, you do have a Corpus Christi team that has been outside the top 100 with regards to opponents' two-point shooting percentage. Very good in terms of not allowing a lot of second and third chances from three-point range, though. So I do think they get a lower scoring slog. 8 or less willing to lay with Stephen F. Austin, 9 or more. Take the points with Corpus Christi. 134 or less, like the over, at 135 or higher, the under. And then we wrap things up with 306, 559, 306, 560. The 1 seed in McNeese, they're going to be facing off against UT Rio Grande Valley. Another game without numbers, but I've got my handicap. I made McNeese the 7.5 point favorite, so 7 or less, I'm going to be willing to lay with them. 8 or more, I'm willing to take the points with Grande Valley and set a total of a 139.5. 139 or less, like the over, 140 or higher, the under. Neither of these teams are really looking to push a lot of tempo with this UT Rio Grande Valley team. Right now, they are 281st in the country in terms of total possessions per game. McNeese is 279th, and McNeese so good in terms of generating turnovers. Numero uno in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. They've been able to thrive on offense as well. This team is 75th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Meanwhile, for Grande Valley, if you look at overall points per possession, they are 164th in the country. That said, in games played away from home, this goes into the top 50 of the country because they have got some wackadoo home and road shooting splits, and really both of these teams do. For UT Rio Grande Valley, it's to the point where they are much better away from home. 40.8% from three-point range is what they shoot away from home. 31.3% at home. Meanwhile, for McNeese, they shoot 36.6% from three-point range at home. 27 7.7% away from them. So very wild, very crazy there. It is a McNeese team that allows you some second and third chances outside the top 275 with regards to defensive rebound percentage, but they all in there about 33.7% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. That's a top 40 mark in the country in Grand Valley. They're not giving themselves a lot of second and third chances. 249th with regards to defensive rebound percentage, and it is a Grand Valley team. Then in terms of taking care of the ball, they've had a few issues here. It's not like completely terrible, but they're about 264th in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. That goes into the, shall we say, top 225 when they're away from home as well. But for McNeese, I do think that they are going to be able to do a nice job in terms of winning the battle down low. For Grand Valley, you don't have a single guy that really gives you over 5.5 rebounds per game, and with this McNeese team, they just do a great job as a collective. Even though they don't have a single guy that gives you over 5.5 rebounds per game, like the fact that you've got Jacob Cole, Jared Colbert, along with Larry Johnson, no, not the running back, who will give you at least 4 rebounds per game. Johnson is your top scorer with about 17 points per game. You've been able to have Javon Garcia do a nice job in terms of lighting it up from 3, 11.5 points. He shoots 36% from 3-point range. And then Kawari Duel, great versatility, 4 assists, 1.7 steals, 8.5 points per game. So these guys all do a great job in terms of, just for lack of a better term, knowing their role. And then with this UT Rio Grande Valley team, it's been very fascinating the way that they've been able to get so much production out of Corey Cotton. He's been your main guy, 13.5 points, 5 boards, 2.5 assists. He shoots 40% per 3. Marvin McGee shoots 42.5% per 3, 10.5 points, 5 rebounds per game. It's a Grand Valley team that is outside the top 200 with regards to generating turnovers, but they've actually done a great job in terms of guarding the 3-point line. They've been a top 45 team with regards to opponents' 3-point shooting percentage, where they do get undone a little bit as on the defensive glass. They too are outside the top 240 with regards to defensive rebound percentage. So they are going to allow a lot of second and third chances, and this is a group that has really struggled to get to the free throw line. They're a bottom 30 team with regards to free throw attempts on a per possession basis. McNeese is a team that's going to put you to the free throw line, and McNeese, they themselves shoot about 75.5% at the free throw line. So this is a circumstance where with McNeese, I'm going to be willing to lay up to 7 with them, 8 or more, taking the points with Grand Valley, 139 or less, in on the over, 140 or higher the under, and that'll wrap things up for the Tuesday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you hear your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have 1 or 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Coming at you guys every single day with picks and analysis on every game every day. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. And once again, big shout out to our guy Rob Donaldson, who joined me in segment number 2. So appreciate you tuning in today. I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.